you have scrolled and clicked your way to Behind the Buzz, a Public Fit Theater Company's occasional podcast detailing, discussing, analyzing, and just downright talking about the production process that we go through in putting together our season of plays and staged readings. This is episode number 7 of season number 2. And unless we manage to score a surprise interview with Dominique Morisseau or Brandon Jacobs-Jenkins, this will probably be the final episode of this season as it corresponds with our final reading of this season, Will Arbery's controversial, contentious, polemical, argumentative Heroes of the Fourth Turning, which will be presented for just 2 performances, Friday, June 24th and Saturday, June 25th, in partnership with the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. I'm Joe Kucan, producing director here at A Public Fit, and as always, I'm joined by artistic director Anne-Marie Pereth.
Hi there.
And any second now, we'll be speaking with Heroes cast members Nick Huff and Lisa Mandel. But first, Anne-Marie, I used an awful lot of pointy adjectives to describe this play. Do you want to talk a little bit about its history with us and how it came to land this in our season?
Sure. So like all the other plays that are in our season, we read this play during the lockdown. We read over 40 plays. And this was a play that was brought to us by a childhood friend of ours, Brad Heberly, who is also a professional actor in New York City. And he said, I saw this really great play prior to the lockdown. He goes, but the topic is a little bit controversial, but I liked it. And I was like, okay. So we got our crew together. And we read it.
We read it twice.
In fact, Nick, I think, was at the second reading. But the first time we read it, because the subject matter dealt with a lot of conservative talking points in the storyline, a lot of the actors really pushed back against the play. They didn't really see the value of the play. I
remember that first reading. Mm-hmm. There was a hesitancy to really commit to these characters. Let me just say, I don't want to steal your thunder here, but it's a play about 4 old friends who are coming to a sort of makeshift reunion. One of their parents is ascending to the presidency of this small Catholic university in the middle of Wyoming. They're very conservative. They're very Republican. It's set literally 1 week after the Charlottesville riots. We're in the age of firmly in the age of Trump. And they talk as you do among friends, very openly about their beliefs.
Yeah. And, when we were doing these play readings during the lockdown, we didn't have anybody prepare. People could read the play in advance if they wanted to. So as they were reading along, they stopped committing to the material because they didn't agree with the subject matter, which I found really interesting. But that being said, it's a really well-written play, and you and I were very interested in it again. So we decided to read it again to see if we would have a similar reaction. And partially we did, but one of the conversations that we had in the discussion afterwards is that we talked about how important the atmosphere of the play is in order to inform the play. And something that we've discovered during rehearsal is, even though it talks about a lot of conservative talking points, the characters are very rich. They're not just one brand of conservatism. They're very interesting characters. They're very lovable characters in some way. And they're just characters who are in a lot of pain, which is very representational of most of humanity.
Sure.
So if you approach the play with that perspective and really dig into the characters and be advocates for the characters, then you start to have a lot of compassion for the story. And I think that's a good thing in the theater, because it opens up an opportunity to have conversations. And our theater company is about having conversations.
Well, we're about conversations, but this season particularly, we spent great pains to make it a season of inclusion and to create as many voices as possible. And it occurred to, I think, both of us that this was a voice that was missing from the theater, not just our theater, I think theater writ large.
Yeah, but I don't feel, and this was something that was talked about when we were doing design presentations, I don't feel like it's like us peering over a window or over a fence and
there's no voyeuristic quality to it.
Look, let's see what the conservatives are doing.
Yeah.
It's something that I discovered in the research was it's about what the debate does to all of us. Right. The debate turns us into very angry, resistant people that are not open to new ideas. And that doesn't matter where you're at in any political idea, whether you're conservative, moderate, liberal, progressive. If you're really holding on to your ideas too tightly, then, that's something that we all should look at.
Well, because even in this play, these four, well, it's a 5-character play, but the four sort of the younger, sorry, Lisa, characters in the play, as you said, different types of conservatives.
She's younger than you.
That is true. Most people are these days.
It's all how you feel, guys. It's all how you feel.
Quiet, you haven't been introduced yet. Sit over there in your corner. Because there are four very different types of conservatives. They argue with themselves. They argue against themselves. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I'm going to introduce them now. Nobody puts Lisa in a corner.
Exactly.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
I'm going to count on my right hand the number of people that get that reference. Let me do a quick, but I'm going to introduce Nick first, just to blabbermouth. Joining us are a couple of performers from Heroes of the Fourth Turning. Nick Huff. Nick is a Los Angeles native who's been back and forth, but now once again lives here in Las Vegas, calls Las Vegas home. Lots of work in film and television. A member of the Actors Gang in Culver City. Is that still true?
Yes.
And you all surely remember Nick from APF's production of Other Desert Cities, as well as playing Ken in what is arguably one of our more popular readings to date. Red, you were in Red.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's
Thanks for coming out, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
And Lisa's here. Hey, Lisa.
Hello, Joseph.
Lisa Mandel was accidentally born in Las Vegas into a true showbiz family. She, along with my humble self, was a founding member of the Rainbow Company Youth Theater, where I have to say she was that company's it girl for, 10, 11 years or so?
As long as they would allow it.
But she didn't stop there. No. Lisa's Broadway and national credits include the Will Rogers Follies, original cast of that, I think. Sunset Boulevard, The Producers, Applause, Copacabana, and Mamma Mia. She's worked at the Peppermill Playhouse, Pioneer Theater Company, Art Center of Coastal Carolina, and was most recently seen here in Las Vegas in the Nevada Conservatory Theater's production of Brighton Beach Memoirs. She earned a BSBA in marketing from University of Arizona's Eller College of Management and a Master of Arts in International Relations from the American College of the Mediterranean, Aix-en-Provence, France. Now, aside from my questionable pronunciation of Aix-en-Provence, was that all pretty accurate?
C'est perfect.
Yeah, sure.
Parfait.
Thanks for coming out. Lisa, you live in Arizona these days, but you've come out to do this reading for us. You've heard Emery and I talk a little bit about the show. I'm done apologizing about the material. In fact, I think when I sort of reached out to you about it, I said, I'm sorry about this play. It's got some questionable themes. It's got some questionable dialogue. But I reached out to you to see if you were interested in it. You read it and loved it immediately, and there was no apology necessary.
Not at all.
Tell me about that.
Well, I think the idea of discourse is something we're missing in our country.
Yeah.
Maybe we're missing it globally, and this play brings it to light. I would say that Will Arbery's writing is very autobiographical. You can go onto the website of the actual Catholic College of Wyoming and see his parents on the advisory board as the president and as one of the lead facts. And so the material is taken from his backyard, but he puts it into everyday dialogue that's relatable from various perspectives. And I think it's easy. I think the easy take is to say, oh, it's super controversial. Liberals are going to have just a heyday with this.
That's
and
what I've been doing.
Conservatives are
I've been doing
I don't see it that way. I read it from A to Z, and I found the characters very humane.
Yeah.
Even when they go off the rails because they are deeply passionate. Now, whether their passion takes them down a path that many of us would be like, wow, that took a turn someplace in life where I didn't expect. It's their turn. that they take, I mean, it's their personal moment and it's true for them. So I would say that's what's really beautiful about the material beyond the humanity that's written into the script is also the idea that there's great truth. Each character speaks his or her truth and not to say my truth is the fact, but it is their personal honesty and truth.
You know, you said autobiographical. I read an interview with Will Arbery and he was, pointing out that anyone who would talk to him about the play would immediately want to pin him down and say, "Hey, you still going to mass? Are you still you still hold some of these beliefs?" And they wanted to know exactly what his perspective was because that would allow them to sort of frame the play in, you know, is he being sarcastic? Is he being ironic? Is he being is he putting forward a point of view? You know, Nick. You know, when we look at plays, Emery and I, and try to find out the character who most probably presents the playwright's true point of view, and we both agree. Tell me if I'm wrong, Emery, but we both agree that that's your character.
Yeah. Well,
does that seem fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you said that through the process when we were doing our table reads initially, and you said, I think that this is probably Will's perspective on the page. And I immediately, it hit me. And I think you're absolutely right. And then going down the rabbit hole of listening to any interviews of his that I could get my hands on and watching, actually, it was a discussion that it was like a Zoom during the pandemic, like a Zoom workshop he led.
God, which one? He did 100 of those. I know. He's all over the place.
Yeah, you can find it on YouTube, and I found it and I was watching it in the first like 5 minutes. I started to feel similar speech patterns to also like Kevin.
Oh, really?
And it just really struck me.
Kevin is your character's name?
Yeah, Kevin is the character I play. And yeah, and I think that that's absolutely what it is. But I find this, similar to what Lisa said, the fact that he's writing about people he knows. These are people he knows. He's not taking these ideas and creating any caricatures around it. These are incredibly intelligent people, which is also the other fascinating thing about it. I think that there is a mindset too that, the caricature that you have of the conservative voter is sometimes portrayed as, dumb and uneducated. And so that was the other thing here too. These people all have really strong points of view, and it's rooted in beliefs, and they can talk through their points, whether you agree with them or not. It's, it's
being very conservative, very conservative politically, but also on a dime, being able to quote Aristotle. And at one point you throw out a Wordsworth poem out of the blue.
Right.
And that these are characters who are educated in a very complete, holistic way, right? I probably using that word wrong.
It's conservatives that have been educated liberally.
And what does they say in the play too? You were taught to climb mountains and build igloos and live off the land,
right.
and as well as being able to quote the philosophers and poets that you do.
Right.
I find that really interesting because he is telling us that these characters are not in any way just some backwater Trump voting hicks. You'll have to excuse that stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that coming from, if the assumption is correct, that I'm sort of representing the author's voice a little bit, where Kevin is sort of questioning himself, like questioning what he's believed up to this point in this very specific time the play is set, which is after the Charlottesville riots with Trump kind of firmly in. Kevin is in this place where, wait a minute, like it's this re-examination of everything he knew to be true, and kind of saying, well, wait, if this really bumps up against my faith, my ideas of like, how did we get here? And I think that Kevin is really struggling with that.
I think he also wrote the play in response to Trump being elected in the research and the discussions that we had, because the assumption is that all conservatives really love Trump as a leader. And so he's bringing that idea into the conversation, in the play. Right.
And do you want to give some of those specifics away, or you want to leave that as a mystery?
Well, not all of the characters actually like Trump, except for maybe one of them.
Sure.
They find his habits and his personal choices, maybe not all of his political choices, to be a bit repulsive.
Right.
And they talk about it freely.
He's certainly not Catholic.
Yeah. They talk about it freely in the play. But one of the characters sees the purpose that Trump serves as a leader to represent a certain voice.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you talked a little bit about the table work that we've done in talking about Kevin as being a sort of mirror for Arbery in some way, or a megaphone for Arbery in some ways. What was your initial reaction to the play, though? Can I ask? Was it similar to mine, which was, oh, my good Lord?
Well, yeah, I remember because I was a part of the second initial reading that we did. And this was during the pandemic over Zoom. And I do remember that post-reading conversation. And I don't know if it was an effect of it being over Zoom and it was less personal, a little removed. You just heard these words and ideas. And, at first glance and at first read, it really jumps out you. There's a lot of fiery language and perspectives that are, shocking, definitely. Yeah. And I think that it was really easy to kind of grab onto that initially and kind of be put off, or just kind of your defense comes up. And I think maybe that's the point too, is this idea of debate, what happens where we dig our heels in and be like, well, I don't like this person, or I don't like that argument. But I do remember that after we read it, we were all kind of the argument, a lot of different voices about not really enjoying the piece. But then, for me, what struck me is that, what is theater if it's not an idea of, if we're not the voices of empathy and trying to, that has to stretch to places we get uncomfortable too.
Your head's going to fall off from nodding so hard, Lisa.
I know it's not playing well on a podcast, but I agree wholeheartedly in the sense that, the characters find this way of bringing about topics that maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you would not hear at a dinner table. You wouldn't hear in public. And so the play also examines, although present day, examines the idea of a timeline in our history through political lenses, and how if we pay that respect and recognize that not everything is in the moment, why is this that? It would be one of the exact lines saying, why is this that? Why are we always making this that? And it gives people, whether they're audience members that are engaged through listening and watching the human interactions, or it's the creatives. And I do think as creatives, it's up to us to play a very truthful part of it, and not necessarily read into the dislike of it, but read into the absolute honesty of the material.
Right. Yeah. I'm so sorry. Yeah. The last final thing I was going to say on that is, beyond the ideas, what I'm finding the more we rehearse is that these are people, and the relationships are coming forward. And these are just people with a tradition, with a worldview. And, some are questioning that, some are getting more firm during this particular time, but it's a lot easier to judge someone when you're just hearing the idea. But when you meet the person, you start to empathize in a new way. And I think that we're starting to find that, which is exciting.
It may be it may not be a great analogy, but just because someone loves to eat peanut butter doesn't mean they like jelly on their sandwich all the time. And so I think
that's a great analogy.
Gina is one of those people where she believes to herself to be extremely conservative, in whatever timeline that is, but is not a lover of the president of that moment.
Yeah.
At all. And so you can't assume that just because you may have voted straight ticket, single issue, however you want to place that all of the rest falls in line easily for us to stick in an envelope, lick it, and mail it.
Right.
Also, another thing that I think is interesting about the play is there's a lot of allusions to other bits of literature that I wasn't even familiar with. So it's so smart, the play, that it really makes me lean in and really listen. He doesn't dumb it down.
At all.
Right. At all. You have to really lean in and listen and pay attention to the dialogue. So it's taken me down a lot of rabbit holes of other references, like the Benedict option, the fourth turnings, Flannery O'Connor, and those are just three. There must be 15 references in the play that I had to look up that I knew nothing about.
Sure. Well, and not to mention the very specific rituals of Catholicism itself. Catholicism plays a heavy part in the play because they're all five of these characters devout Catholic. And Gina, for God's sake, is about to become president of the Catholic University there, the Catholic College there.
Yeah, and his understanding of Catholicism and the scriptures and the transfiguration that's mentioned, he embeds that language into the text, and I can see all of those allusions in the text. And it can take many, many hours to really research and reference all those points to see what he's doing. It's very smart.
So is this just a smart person's play though? Are we going to alienate our dumber audience members?
Well, what I always tell my students as directors or when we're analyzing plays or when we're putting on a show, we never want to oversimplify anything and assume that people won't understand. People like to be challenged when they come to the theater. They like to not know everything, because then once they see the play and they haven't figured it all out, their minds are still going, and then they go off and research, and sometimes they come back if it's really that interesting. I don't think we should ever dumb down a play for anybody.
Oh, no, I completely agree. And I think it'd be very hard. I think that the way this play is written, I don't know that you could dumb it down. I don't know that there would be a way to dumb this one down. I think it's pretty smart on the page. You'd really have to go out of your way to dumb this one down. I want to talk a little bit. You guys mentioned their philosophical backgrounds, their education, their Catholicness. It's one of the things that Arbery says in the intro to the play is he says, essentially, this is a play about whiteness. And I think it's something we have to talk about. We have had a very inclusive season this year. I'm thinking immediately of plays like Skeleton Crew, an all-black cast, and directed by Jason Nias, an African-American director. And I think about the language in that play. And then I look at this play, Will Arbery, a very white playwright, a very white cast, talking about the nature of whiteness, that the play is what sometimes we see when people know that they are among like-minded people without any outside observers, and how they speak in that way. Is that a valuable perspective these days? The nature of whiteness? Can we in any way take pride in presenting that perspective? Oh, no, nobody wants to jump in on this one. No, it's hard. And I want to acknowledge the difficultness of the subject itself. I understand it, but safe space here.
Right. But it feels like, and I could be very incorrect in saying this, it feels like we're going against inclusivity, although the group itself is considered inclusive because of their subset. So if it's a subset group of inclusive individuals, then it feels, at least in bringing the truth to everything, it feels a little bit more safe to do. I will say it's an uncomfortable perspective for me. It does feel there's something difficult about it, but I think that is one of the great challenges, is that the dialogue is pretty overt and saying, hey, pay attention now, here comes a little white moment.
I completely agree with you. The only thing I would add to that is that in terms of the idea of inclusivity, I don't know how often we hear from the far right conservative political viewpoint on the stage. I don't know how often that is given voice in toto. I mean, the entire play is those characters. There is no funny liberal outsider who steps in to be the clown and to show the other side. There's nothing like that in this play. This is five very conservative, some would say extreme, well, a couple of characters, it's not even some would say, a couple of characters promote themselves as being extremely far right. One character is certain that there is a literal war coming, a literal war, a civil war in America, and she's preparing for it. And I think that voice, again, without uninterrupted by the clownish liberal outsider, we don't see that a lot on the Broadway stage, on any stage in America these days.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I guess my thought, at the risk of, coming across, at just painting it with a broad stroke, I think I do agree that it is a difficult thing to tackle, but I think that if the theater is a place where we're going to try to get to the heart of understanding a person's maybe motivations and structures, this play, even though with the outset of, yes, it's a full white cast, but we are getting to the heart of these people. And instead of even, like you said, representing the conservative mindset, we as, a liberal minded person can easily paint that with a broad stroke too. So in here, getting in, I think we are still trying to get to a problem to solve and a people to understand. I think understanding is only going to bring us closer together. And so it could be helpful in just getting a more rich, full 3D representation of something, rather than just saying, oh, here I am, I'm a theater going liberal person and I'm just going, and the conservatives are this one blank thing. This definitely bumps up against that, because I think even just your idea of what you said, Anne-Marie, earlier about, I think there are a lot of people that think all conservatives love Trump. Just that idea. I mean, I think that would be, if you just polled people on the street, I think most liberals would say, yeah, they all love him. That's very clearly not, the case once you start digging in. Sure. And there's a ton of people holding their nose and for all kinds of reasons, rooted down into who they are. I mean, especially with Catholicism and faith as a backdrop. I mean, these are things that are deep in someone's, belief system. And so representing that point of view, I think, is itself inclusive in a way, even though it's beyond whiteness.
Well, it's also about language too, though, isn't it? I mentioned Skeleton Crew earlier, and one of the things that came up, we buzz after all of our shows, all of our readings. We continue the conversation with the audience, and in one of the buzzes for Skeleton Crew, I was introduced to a term that I hadn't heard for a while called code switching, where some of the people of color in the audience were mentioning to me that what the playwright had really gotten right was the way those Black characters could speak to each other and would change their language when introduced to an outsider. And they called that code switching, that the context of their words would change. And it made me think about the way language is used in this play as well. And I wonder if there isn't some sort of, do you think that the language between these characters would change if a young liberal or let's say a Hispanic walked into this conversation? Would their pretense change?
Well, isn't it? It's even mentioned in the play that Kevin tries to engage about the subject of transgender over Facebook. Yeah. And he does. He code switches in order to try and reach a broader audience with his perspective. And many groups code switch. The LGBTQIA community code switch. Women, I code switch as a woman all the time when I'm with a certain group of people. Sure. And so in this play, they don't have to code switch because they all have a similar religious background, and they all have an experience where they went to school together. So they're all referring to the same thing. So they get to be exactly who they are in this space, this outdoor space around a fire, and talk about the things, even if they are in conflict with each other.
Why does that feel so dangerous?
Because nobody wants to be accused of being racist, or nobody wants to be accused of being homophobic. Yeah. Right. And so, and that's what the language is about right now with the Black Lives Matter community, right? And with the LGBTQIA community, finally those groups are finding some understanding within the community, and so being heard. Yes. And so we don't want to take a step backwards. And so when you brought up the question amongst all of us, I think my initial fear was like, well, I don't want anybody to think that I'm racist, or I don't want anybody to think that I'm closed-minded. Or that this play is actually trying to pull some of that territory back. Or we're doing a play about whiteness. Right. We're actually doing a play where we're trying to understand a very specific group of people, right? And that those people are being represented on stage. And unless you see it and you work with the play, it's hard to explain exactly what I'm talking about.
You mentioned the same moment I thought of when you posed the question, Joe, is when Kevin talks about in trying to engage people on the transgender conversation, and how mad he is about the comment wars on Facebook. And I do think that these conversations are happening on social media so much, where it's just these, and people behind the keyboard are vicious and ugly,
very
and
brave,
brave keyboard warriors,
and things are triggering, and an idea is triggering. And then so I think you can see where Kevin is getting it wrong, trying to have the transgender conversation. Probably on Facebook, I could see where Kevin would not be handling that correctly. But when you sit with Kevin, and like, as I have, I think that Kevin really is curious, trying to understand, and then getting shut down. And then his line is actually, "What do you want me to hate you?" Yeah. Well, and then it's
part of that is the venue, though, too. Kevin makes a great, one of the first scenes that Kevin has, he says, "Look, we need to have a big conversation. Remember when we used to have the big conversation? Let's have a big conversation." That's really what he wants. And I don't think that anyone has ever found that on Facebook. I don't know that anyone has ever found a big conversation on any sort of social media, because it is so much back and forth of this one line and that one line, and I'm trying to up you with a snotty remark. And
right, I think there's a great deal of one-upping and a great deal of I need to be right.
Yeah,
I not necessarily Lisa Mandel need to be right, but I think when people put their viewpoint out, they need to be validated. There's a sense of validation necessity of my belief couldn't possibly be wrong. And I think instead of taking the challenge and maybe letting it sit for a second and thinking about where's that middle ground, people, wow, okay, we have an extra friend on the podcast right now that maybe.
For those of you at home, Lisa has produced a very small Yorkie from a very large purse.
But no, I think to your point, I think the Facebook conversation, this is a place where, and I think that reminds me of when we did our first reading. I think you tried to identify the first moment in the play where that is going to make people uncomfortable. And it's very early. It's very early. And it's like, and we're not used to that. When we're uncomfortable with something, we usually, if it's a social media thread, we don't sit with it longer than that. We have a reaction and we move away from it.
We call it triggering.
Or not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, we might have some audience members who are like, yeah, well, I agree with that.
Right.
Or I agree with Gina, or I agree with Emily, or I understand Kevin, or I understand Teresa.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I think that both sides of the aisle, if we play our cards right, if we do our play right, if we present these characters right, I think both sides of the political aisle is going to understand these people. It's going to understand these characters, whether they share their points of view or not. I don't know that that's what we're trying to do. I don't know that we're trying to convince anybody of a point of view. I think the opposite of that. I think we're trying to present these characters to be understood as people, to be understood as characters, not necessarily to be understood as political talking points.
Yeah, that's not the point of the play.
Not at all.
And oftentimes when we get into these political discussions, we want an outcome where we are right. But the play doesn't do that. There's so much that's unresolved in the play.
Well, that's an important part of it too, isn't it?
Yes, that's why I like the play, because it's unresolved, because it's about the discourse, the conversation. It's not about resolving things in terms of like, I'm right and you're wrong. Conservatives are right and liberals are wrong, or liberals are right and conservatives are wrong.
Right.
That is not what I feel Will Arbery is trying to do. That is not the purpose of the play.
I think we both mentioned at one point in our first table read about an interview with Will Arbery, who said that is the point. One of the points of his writing was he's like, I'm not going to give you a solution. Basically, he's like, I'm just a guy. I don't necessarily have the solution. He says, but that is what seems to charge audiences. They're like, you didn't tell me what was right. He's like, that's right. It's a play for you to invest in and engage in. And whether you make a determination or switch your current mindset or broaden your mindset was, I think, one of the points he had made in an interview.
Well, how many times have we experienced that in the theater, of an audience member coming and asking you, well, what happened to so-and-so? Right. Or what does this mean in the play? What is the meaning of the thing with the stuff and the guy who does the thing? And very often, we don't have answers for those questions, because those are answers that audiences must bring.
Yeah. What does it mean to you?
Yeah. What does it mean to you? How did it play to you? And that's the point of it very often.
Also, the structure of modern plays are mostly they don't have a resolution in the way that plays of the 50s and 60s and 70s did. There's a lot of open-ended questions, like for us to go away and go, well, what happens next?
So what's coming up at A Public Fit? We've been talking today about Will Arbery's Heroes of the Fourth Turning. That will be presented on June 24th at 7 o'clock and again on June 25th at 2 over at the Clark County Library at 1401 East Flamingo Road. Doors open 1/2 hour before showtime, so come a little early, say hello, and claim the best seat. And as always, admission to the readings is free of charge. Now, we are very close to announcing our 2022-23 season. 3 exciting new plays for dynamic stage reading. So if you haven't followed us on social media, now is as good a time as any to subscribe. And if you want even more information, you can, of course, visit us online at apublicfit.org. We had a great season this year, even amidst all the continuing chaos and uncertainty that is threatening to become the new normal. And we are just so grateful that so many of you came out to share these stories with us. We are continuing to build and looking forward to presenting the very best possible theatrical experience that the Las Vegas Valley has to offer. And again, we just want to thank you so much for your continued support. So we talked a little bit about the characters in terms of their education, in terms of their fundamental belief systems. But it seems to, one of the things you said, Arbery, at the very beginning of the podcast today was that everyone is feeling a certain amount of fear. There's a lot of fear in these characters. What's everybody so afraid of in the play? Where does that come from? Why is that such a heavy theme in this particular show? How does it fit in?
You know, the play talks a lot about politics.
Yeah.
But what I see from the characters is they're really at the heart of it. They want to be loved and accepted by each other, and they want to form personal attachments. That's what I see a lot of their motives are. And so that's the underbelly. They use the conversation and the debate to connect, but they really want to be accepted by their friends. And I think that's
universal.
All of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we all want to be part of a tribe and feel connected and be loved and have relationships and have a community and family attachments.
Yeah, I think, it's about belonging and wanting to belong to a thing. And I think that that's what's so tragic for Kevin, is that this was where he belonged. And then, you know, I think the Trump thing really, for Kevin's character, was a blow to his understanding of the sides of, you know, because Kevin is incredibly intelligent, but it sort of accelerated his process of not really being able to stand behind or to apologize or come up with a rational reasoning for the state of where a lot of the conservative values not being represented and things. And so he's sort of in the middle. I think the image I had initially was that Kevin's like that guy on the side of a bridge, sort of like not like really, really desperate to belong. I think he's got that extreme wanting to belong, but one step away from, you know, completely cutting loose and going and into the world, as he puts it. And, you know,
finding a new tribe.
Yeah. Yeah. And seeking and, you know, he's charged up and he's desperate. And I think he represents what happens when these explosive debates start happening. I mean, he can't take much more of it. You know? So
I think you're sort of speaking for the four younger characters, the just graduated students. Lisa, your character is ascending to the presidency of this college, but she has fears of her own coming in. She also represents a certain amount of just trepidation and fear of the world.
Without a doubt. She is, Gina makes several references in looking for approval.
Yeah.
Looking for approval on curriculum, looking for approval on being a woman ascending to this position.
Was she the right choice?
Was she really the right choice? I believe I've made a choice as an actor that Gina knows she's the right choice.
Yeah.
Because this is what she wanted. But she also grapples with the idea, again, of a time continuum of as either a child or a young woman, this wouldn't have been a possibility. So for all of the references she has negating progressivism, she's on board at this moment in the world being progressive enough.
It's worked out for her.
It's worked out for her. But she is in constant question and then a realization or self-doubt that anything that she had been teaching, professing, whether her reason or her rhetoric really did any good. Did it do more damage than bringing in the common good? She
does have a great confliction with one of the other characters on a very fundamental level about just philosophy of life and how motherhood and the women's role in the world.
Right.
Yeah. And
which doesn't line up with her career goals either.
Yeah.
I mean, she's going to find a way for it to meld and she'll feel successful, but really I think there's an examination as she finds herself at the end of the night of do her personal goals, her goals of faith and her professional goals, do they meld into being a positive force for her community, for her society, for her students? That having been said, does it... this is a question for the both of you. As actors, do you find this play to have specific challenges that are different from other shows that you've done, or is this just work as usual? You find a character, define their motivations and their desires, and just say the words.
What do you think, Lisa?
I definitely, maybe it's the Gemini in me. I see both sides of it. I think that I've not been part of an in the moment play. Most of the pieces that I've had to approach or had the good fortune to approach have very deep historic reference. Or a very specific period of time where we can sit here in 2022 and this play took place in 2017. So it's not the same year, but it feels somehow, because in between we had the beginning of a pandemic and a lockdown, that some of this, again, time continuum gets mushy.
It feels very current. It feels like really current.
It feels very today. So that to me is a challenge in keeping a truth to 2017 and the activities of that moment, which are very different from the activities of today's moment and Ukraine and everything else that's happening globally. Would that change the perspective of our characters? Again, Gina speaks to one of the groups that she had joined as a young woman, and that it was against globalization, but it was for the entrepreneur. And I would say in today's world, we kind of put globalization and entrepreneurship together. I mean, we don't speak of capitalization in any of those forms, but it's, as an actor, it's keeping it current. I think Social Network was one of the best films I ever saw, because as I stepped out of the movie theater, it was happening. So I think
that's interesting.
As an actor, I'm trying to I'm making choices that reflect 2017, but people are going to be seeing it in June of 2022.
It's funny that you brought up Social Network. I had a similar experience of walking out of the theater and watching people between the door to the theater and the concession stand texting and sending, updates to their Facebook pages. And it did seem very, very current for that. I don't know if we have a similar, we're going to have a similar experience with this play.
I think, when you, like, as far as approaching as an actor, I think maybe I had a little trepidation so we did the reading in 2020. And then when I heard that we were going to do this for an audience and I read the play again on my own, I did get a little nervous, like, just reading it, because you look at the content, and then being a little trepidatious when we came to that first read, and then something happened on the first read. We were all laughing a bunch, and the people showed up. And then I thought, oh no, this is not different. This isn't different.
I just have to say, I think I told you guys this on the day. I think Emery and I both spoke to this. We've done a lot of shows at APFN before. And I think that, the first reading always happens after design presentations, and you sit around and you learn the world that you're going to exhibit. You look at the costumes that the character is going to be wearing. And then you sit down, and for the first time as an entire cast, you read through the play start to finish. And this was one of the best first reads I've ever been involved with. It was dynamic. It was hysterical, and it crackled. The room crackled with that first reading. I'm not speaking out of turn, am I?
No, not at all. It was really exciting to see the characters show up. And like I said before in a previous comment, if you focus on the characters and not focus in on all of the themes of the play, then you start to have compassion for them as individuals. And I think he wrote very distinct characters who have very individual voices that are different from each other.
What do you think the audience reaction is going to be, Emery?
I can't speak for all audience members. That's a difficult question. And I know a lot of our audience members, and I know some of them to be conservative. I know some of them to be moderate. I know some of them to be liberal. I know some of them to be progressive. I know some of them not to be interested in politics. So that's a difficult question. I am very curious about the conversation and the willingness for people to speak up. And I think our audiences are conditioned to have conversations, and I think we'll have a good conversation, but I have no idea what's going to happen.
It's kind of exciting because I have no idea either. And it's funny because you started listing, some of our friends, liberals, moderates, conservatives, progressives, apolitical. And with each category that you ticked off, I immediately found something in the play that would appeal to that group, that they could connect to within the show and would speak to them. I think it's that well written a play.
Historians. We have an audience member who could have a PhD in history. I'm curious to hear what that particular audience member has to say.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious. What do you guys think? Have you thought about this at all?
I think I was probably, if you've been listening to the podcast, and for us to say that the first read was full of laughs, like that's probably a surprise considering what we're talking about. And it was a surprise to me too. And where does a laugh come from? It comes from recognition of behavior or people. And so, that's, you recognize something and so I'm surprised that if it's anything like my reaction to it, it's surprising and, the triggering, but also like, I don't think anybody's minds are going to change.
No, we're not trying to.
And we're not trying to.
Yeah,
and we're not trying to. And it'll be interesting. I have a feeling that, it's going to, I don't think, I would be shocked if anybody, just because I don't know, maybe I'm biased because I've grown to be so compassionate towards these people. But maybe that's from sitting with it so long. So I think it'll be interesting. Yeah, where did I get to? To nothing. I didn't get an answer.
No, it's very politically correct.
And back where we were.
And still have the ticket in my hand.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think it's important to admit that we aren't trying to change minds. But we're not trying to present any sort of political viewpoint other than the political viewpoint of these characters.
Yeah.
Which, as we said earlier, is kind of ignored in the community writ large and in the theater community anyway. I am curious. I'm curious for the buzz afterwards. I'm curious for that conversation. But I think that's going to end this conversation. Thanks, Lisa and Nick for joining us. This is
thank you.
Been a great conversation. I still don't know if I'm 100% ready to be in front of an audience with this one. But I do feel a little bit better.
Well, you have to lead the bus.
I do. I do.
That would scare me.
I'm looking forward to it. I have to say. So, Anne-Marie, we just recorded a conversation about Heroes of the Fourth Turning, Will Arbery's play, which is the last play of our 2021-22 season, a free reading out at the Clark County Library. And it just made me think, I was kind of looking back. with some fondness for this year's season. We did a really brave thing,
I'm really proud of this season.
I'm proud of it too. I'm proud that it happened beyond the shows that we chose.
Yeah, it was hard.
Well, not only it was hard.
During
COVID, well, the summer came and as some of you may remember.
Hot vax summer.
Yeah, we had our hot vax summer. The vaccines came out and we just assumed everything would be back to normal in the next couple of months. So we've
been pretty lucky.
We announced a 7-show season, 3 main stage productions, 4 readings.
I was just telling my dentist, he asked me how the theater company was going. I was like, it went really well. And in spite of COVID, we only had to shut down for 1 week. One week for 7 shows. So I think that's pretty impressive.
I think so too. I wanted to just look back with fondness and just talk a little bit about this season.
Is this where I have to list all the shows?
No, because I have them written down here. I couldn't remember them either.
Because I started to write them down too. I was like, okay, we did that show and then this show. What was first? What was second?
Well, I'll tell you what was first. We started with Foxfinder by Don King, and it was a sort of revisiting of the show that started Public Fit. It was the first show we did. We did it out at the Cockroach Space 10 years ago. And we sort of reinvented the show this time. I was so proud of the creepy just environment, the moody air that you created. And I feel like we
understood the characters in a much more complex way. And I feel like I was a better director, and all the actors who participated in it, they just created more 3-dimensional characters.
You reunited 3/4 of the cast. Tina came in to replace Shelley, who was unable to do it. But I was really proud of that show. A couple other challenges. It was at a different space, not our own. We did this one out at the space, out on an Industrial, and that had its own challenges as well. But again, I think fairly successful. I give that one a minus.
All right.
Yeah.
Are we going to grade them?
No,
Please let's not grade them.
No, let's not grade them. That's okay. So if we're not going to grade them, I give Foxfinder an A+. So we don't have to do that anymore.
Okay, let's stop.
Okay. And then we had our first reading. Our first stage reading of this season was Gloria by Brandon Jacob Jenkins. And people will remember that one maybe for its surprise violence.
Yes, workplace aggression and politics.
Right.
And we brought in an actor who... he usually acts for us, but he directed that show and he did a great job. He rehearsed a lot with his actors. He had a wonderful relationship with
Staley.
them.
We can say his name, Jake Staley.
Yep, Jake Staley.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is going well. This is really going well.
I think it is. But that was one of the things that we wanted to do this season. In fact, the 3 of the 4 readings were directed by people other than us, because I think after a while people get tired of just seeing our perspectives on things.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to direct a play. You have to come up with a concept. You have to have a vision. You have to lead people. You have to work with actors, designers. You have to, work with the producers. And so we want to help other people take on that role. And I think we did a good job with that.
Well, not just that. With this season particularly, we threw a lot more money at the readings, a lot more when I say a lot more, I mean more than 0, which we had done in the past. We included some scenic elements, some design choices in terms of costumes and sound. And I think we really elevated just the production of the readings.
Yeah, we had to figure it out. We decided to give the readings more of a budget.
Right.
And pay all of the participants who were involved. And there was an expectation for the readings that they couldn't just rehearse for 4 days or a week.
Sure.
That they had to have a rehearsal process that lasted a certain amount of time. And we had that in the past, but each director, depending on their level of commitment and availability, some, like Daniel, he would come in for just 1 week and rehearse, for 10 hours a day and did a fine job. And then other directors in the past would rehearse sometimes for a whole month. And so we kind of wanted to streamline that and make sure that the quality of the work was always consistent.
Well, and that brings me to our second reading, our third production, our second reading, Skeleton Crew by Dominique Morisseau, directed by Jason Nias, who brought a really specific vision to that to that production. Again, very simple scenic design, but very evocative of the automobile workplace.
Yeah, Jason has quite a unique background. He's an acrobat. He's also a dancer. He has his own percussion dance company called Melody. So he incorporated the percussion element into that particular reading because it says in the play that the automotive plant is supposed to have a life of its own.
Right. It's almost another character.
Right. And he was able to do that with his company.
Yeah.
And do it very in a matter of like an hour.
It was remarkable.
It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, he would say, I think we need something here, and his guys would go off and come back with kaboom, bang, smash, kaboom, bam, wow, and it was suddenly a thing.
It's like, wow, these guys are talented.
We had our first sort of COVID stumble with our next production. It was our second fully realized production of Craig Wright's recent tragic events. I just want a quick shout out to Craig Wright, who was gracious enough to join us on the podcast. We had a great conversation with him.
Yeah, that show was very successful for us. There was a comic element to it. It was also centered around the theme of 9/11.
Yeah, I think about the darkness of Foxfinder in comparison to the sort of, I won't say silliness, but weird goofiness in some ways of recent tragic events.
Well, they had a sock puppet.
They did have a sock character was portrayed as a sock puppet.
Yes, Joyce Carol Oates.
Joyce Carol Oates.
But there was a lot of comedy in that show. It was very well acted.
Directed by Eric Amblad.
And I was really, really proud of the work in that show. And I was really proud that the play worked.
Yeah.
Because it's
20 years old.
Yeah, it's 20 years old. It's about 9/11. And the reason why we did that was we didn't want to do a play about COVID. We wanted to do a play about another tragic event, and then maybe open up the doors for people to talk about COVID in an indirect way, talk about their trauma that they experienced during the lockdown. And that happened during many of our buzzes. It was
remarkable. I'm glad to hear that you did it on purpose, because that just makes us look so smart. Our next stage reading, Stop Kiss by Diana Sun, directed by Kimberly Mellon. Sort of a bigger reading for us. A lot of scenes, it was
massive.
Yeah.
She brought in it was a huge scenic design. She had costume changes. The interior work of the piece in terms of the acting was very well crafted.
Well, and another older play that was still landing hard. For a lot of folks in the LGBT community, Stop Kiss is a very important play in the canon. And
that is a play that gave a lot of our community permission to acknowledge and recognize their LGBTQIA-ness, right? And the play really worked because it's really a play about people who love each other, and that experience of falling in love and the awkwardness of that, and we can all relate to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Then you and I stepped back into the directing ring together at last to do Andrew Bovel's Things I Know to Be True back at the usual place. I think we were both of us a little unsure going into that rehearsal process exactly what that show was going to finally be. We had a lot of challenges in front of us.
Personally, I wanted to do the play because we wanted to layer on a more abstract way of storytelling through a lot of physicality and music.
Yeah.
And the play essentially is a family drama, but we felt like the play was really relevant because one of the characters, Mark, transitions from Mark to Mia, right? Yeah. And there's not a lot of representation in terms of the transgender community.
Well, very honest portrayal as well. The family's reaction to his outing himself and admitting that he was going to go through this process.
Yeah, it was about the parents' experience, the sister's experience, and his experience, not just his experience.
Right.
And he also was not central in the story. He was just one of the vignettes in the story, which I think is a good thing because one of our audience members, Autumn Widows, I think is her name, she talked about if it would have been an American playwright, the American playwright would have made the transgender concept or theme central.
Right.
The whole story would be about that. But it was really about the family dynamic,
right,
which is less polarizing.
Right, and it allowed to be discussed. It allowed it to be discussed in a calm, more rational way. Although not without emotion. We did have a lot of emotional buzzes for that particular show. People really connected to that show on a visceral level. I was really proud of it.
Yeah, and we also thought we struggled with that play in rehearsal because it's very dramatic. And we were worried that it was going to be too dramatic, too overwrought. But I think with all of the work that we embedded in the transitions and the abstract movement and the abstract set and the use of very few props, it really made the play work.
Yeah, and it was very well received, I think I have to say. Which brings us to the last show, the last reading of the season. We've been talking about that all day. Heroes of the Fourth Turning by Will Arbery. You and I back in the director's seat together again.
We're getting along really well, too.
I know. We hardly fight at all anymore.
I know.
Where's the drama, Anne-Marie?
I understand you better.
And I tolerate you more.
You're so smug.
That is true. I am smug. What do you think about this one? Is this one going to land?
I'm having a great time just because.
I have to say, we're still in rehearsals. We haven't put this one up yet. It is just the beginning of June. This one goes up June 24th.
It is a lot of work to always put on a play, whether it's fully produced or it's a reading. You have to do almost the same amount of work, even if it is a stage reading, because you have to do the research on the play.
And we take it really seriously, I have to say.
But what makes it worthwhile is the people. And we as a company, as an artistic team and a production staff, Brandy Blackman included, our stage manager, we're just having the best time in rehearsal. And because of that, we're finding a lot of things in the rehearsal process because there's a lot of trust and openness. And those are all good things that need to happen in the rehearsal process in order to tell a good story.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a pretty good summary of our work for this year. But I want to hear if there's anyone out there listening to us now. I'd like to get some responses from you as well. We hear you at the Buzz. We chat. We have these conversations at the end of all of our shows, at the end of all of our readings. We're always here to talk about theater and the work that we do. But if you want to reach us directly, you can drop us an email either at joe@apublicfit.org or
Anne-Marie at apublicfit.org.
And if you just want to sort of reach out in general, we can be reached at behindthebuzz@apublicfit.org. Again, thanks, Lisa and Nick, for really getting into it about Will Arbery's remarkable play. And you out there, if you're listening right now, I hope you've subscribed. But have you taken the time to give us a quick review? Your feedback allows us to improve upon these conversations and fine-tune the podcast, as well as allowing other listeners across the interglobe to discover us and our work. Talking about the work is one of the favorite things that we do here at APF, and we'd really like for you to join us in that conversation. Behind the Buzz is a product of a Public Fit Theater Company in association with Giant Leap Industries. Adam Paul, Director /Phi Delta Pi.